Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the battery safety and just safety precautions that should be taken when dealing with the battery system and some of the other high voltage connections on the pod.
The battery system is the most dangerous system on the pod. There's a lot that can go wrong with it, but we have not had an issue, and you won't either if you treat it right.
And respect the system is kind of the big thing. You don't really know if high voltage is ever there because you can't see electricity. So that's why we're going to kind of cover some things to hopefully help keep you safe. And we will also have some courses this semester with WEMPEC instructors to go over some of the safety protocols that we will follow throughout the year. So here we kind of have some dangers and then some do's and some don'ts. So some dangers, like the main one being high voltage. It's a high voltage system. It can kill you if you don't treat it properly and you don't act safely around it. Other things that we want to look out for are over voltage on a cell, under voltage on a cell. We kind of keep track of those with some of the monitoring systems that we have. So we'll kind of keep our eye on those though too. Physical trauma, it's a big, heavy, robust system. Just keeping that in mind and acting safe around it.
The other thing with physical trauma is with the battery cells themselves, you do not want to treat them or you don't want to mishandle them. Any physical trauma to the cells themselves can lead to pretty bad situations, and this next guy here, all of these situations can lead to thermal runaway and a battery fire, which is worst case scenario. I will say one more thing, with the high voltage, one thing we do to kind of mitigate this risk is to have our battery pack broken up into individual modules of lower voltage. This makes each individual module safe to work with at a lower voltage and less prone to a dangerous electrocution event.
And another benefit to like kind of isolating different parts is if we have a problem in one area of the pack, we want to isolate that problem to that cell. So that's kind of some of the precautions that we'll take going through. So some do's, like things to keep in mind when you're working around the battery system and the high voltage parts of the pod. We're going to take the WEMPEC 101 and 102 courses, and those are 2-hour-long courses just to kind of get an idea, and so we can really understand some of the things that we need to keep in mind when working.
101 is for low voltage, so if you're working on the low voltage systems, you should take that. 102 is if you're going to be working on any of the high voltage systems in the pod. We kind of require that you take that.
Yep. Ask questions if you're not sure. Shelby and I and other members of the team have a lot of experience dealing with the battery pack and high voltage systems. We know a lot, so if you're not sure, just ask, and we can get you an answer. We can definitely try to understand what's going on. We want to keep the pack disconnected when it's not in use. Just keep it away from everything else and keep it isolated. We don't want to keep it hooked up and then we don't really know what's going on. So keep it isolated when we're not using it. PPE is very important.
Personal protective equipment.
Yeah, so I guess we're like rubber gloves with insulation to kind of isolate yourself from the circuitry when you're operating with the high voltage.
Yeah, so this is something we'll only let you do if you have taken this 102 class, and that is when you'll be able to work with high voltages over 100 volts, and that's when you'll want said PPE to really protect yourself from electrocution.
Yep. And the cell the battery pack in total that we're going to be dealing with is probably going to be about 300 volts, and anything over 50 volts is usually considered deadly in high voltage. So I guess this is probably the biggest one for me, is only work on the system if you're comfortable with it. Don't feel like you have to do something. Don't feel like you must do something. We want you to be comfortable. We want you to be confident in what you're doing and following all the training accordingly so that you're comfortable with what you're doing.
And then it comes back to asking questions if you're unsure. We're all open to answering questions.
Yep, and then Shelby was kind of touching on the battery fire before. If a battery fire happens, we can't do anything. We're just gonna have to call 911 and kind of step away. We're not gonna be able to put it out. It's a chemical fire. We don't have the equipment to do that, so we got to call in professionals that can handle that situation for us.
Right.
And then double check connections. If you're connecting wires together, don't just do it willy-nilly. All the schematics, everything's planned out in a certain way, so things receive certain voltages, certain currents, so that will help us avoid like overcurrents, over voltages of certain components that could lead to some of those failures.
Yeah, this is especially important, mainly important before you power on the pod, and you should always know what you're expecting to happen on the pod based on the connections that you have before anything gets turned on.
So those are some do's, just basically being smart, being careful with what you're doing, and being comfortable and asking questions. So some don'ts: don't short batteries together. That's just not smart. We just try to avoid doing that because that'll just lead to a failure. Shelby has a
that-
little experience with that.
Did that once. Let's
Yeah.
not have it happen.
I think
That's how you get here is the cells get really hot and then it did not happen, thankfully, but it can lead to pretty bad situations.
And that just goes to show that mistakes do happen. We just try to avoid them. And if we do make mistakes, we want them to be little ones that we can quickly react to. Don't puncture batteries. Back to the physical trauma. We can't be abusive to the batteries. We can't drop them. We can't beat up on them. They're designed to build in like the way that we need to use them. We don't want to destroy them, weaken them, or things like that. Rush. Don't be quick. Be deliberate in your actions. Make sure you know what you're doing and take your time to make sure you're doing things properly. We're not about like doing it as fast as you can. It's not about that. It's about doing it the right way so we get things safely done in a correct manner that it'll work well in the future. Don't try to put out a battery fire. As we said, it's a chemical fire. You can't really do it. We don't have the equipment to do it. We got to call in professionals. And we're probably going to do a lot of the battery systems, hopefully outside this year, where we have space in case something does go wrong. We'll have ample space to deal with the problem. So just things to keep in mind. Don't work on high voltage alone. As we said, high voltage can be deadly if mistreated. And if you're there by yourself and if something unfortunate was to happen and there was an accident or an event and you get shocked, you can't react because your body's in trauma, you need to have somebody with you in case something like that were to happen, because then that person can get help, treat you properly, and do what they need to do to assess that situation. And don't assume anything. You can't see electricity. You can't just assume that it's not present. So we'll learn about some of this, but there's the live dead alive test. We'll take your meter, you'll test it on something that you know, then measure the thing that you're measuring, and then test it again to make sure that the meter still works throughout that whole process, so that you know what your meter is reading is what's actually there. And don't assume the voltage is, oh, I turned it off, it's going to be gone. You don't know there's capacitors and other components that can hold some of that charge. So just because there's no power in the system doesn't mean that the system's at zero potential. So don't assume anything. And overall, just use your head and do what you're comfortable with, I think, are really the big takeaways. And just be smart and be safe.